test audio, make sure, does everybody hear me okay? Does that sound good? All right. We're gonna get ready to begin here. I want to start, make sure our live feed is going. My friend Don is going, and I want to start with a couple really important introductions here. To my right are seated our sign language interpreters, both of which have given their time. We have Andrea Behill and Kathleen Rooney. I'd like a round of applause for these folks here. Thank you, Kathleen and Andrea. It's important for us to be able to include everybody. So keeping in mind when we're discussing tonight, particularly when we're fielding questions from the audience and for our panel members, that these ladies are going to be translating American Sign Language, everything that is being said here. So if they ask for us to slow down or if they ask for a little help, let's be cognizant of that, and I'll try and remind folks if we need either to slow the pace a little bit or maybe we need to repeat something. So thank you for that. Good evening, Farmington. My name is Benjamin Baker, and I have the pleasure of working for our Governor, Michelle Grisham. I am a lifetime New Mexico resident and a career law enforcement officer, and it's an honor to be back in this community. I was reflecting with some of the panel members. We were here back in May in Cabinet community at the local school district, and we visited Shiprock. It is really nice to be in your city center. I want to thank the chief, the city, and the mayor particularly for their use of this venue. It is glorious. Thank you very much to the community for arriving to participate in this discussion. As you may have seen, we have done a ton of traveling in the last 30 days or so. I'm going to give you a couple of the places that we've been because I think it's important to what we're going to be talking about here. As New Mexico is a very big state, but everybody has unique challenges as it relates to public safety, and that is the topic that we are going to cover tonight. We're grateful to do it with you today. So we have been starting in Clovis, Las Cruces, Santa Fe, Albuquerque, Espanola, Portales, Las Cruces, and most recently, yesterday, Gallup, last Wednesday, Carlsbad. Every single one of these town hall settings or community meetings surrounding public safety has garnered significant insight into what is being experienced in the communities to which many of you serve and all of you live in. So we're really grateful for the opportunity to learn what is happening here in Farmington and in San Juan County, to experience what we can learn from each other, where the leaders that are seated up here on this panel can intersect with the state of New Mexico to create and leverage better, not only relationships, but systems to deliver increased public safety to the citizens of not only San Juan County and the city of Farmington, but New Mexico. This is truly one of those circumstances where we find ourselves at a place where your goals in this audience are exactly the same as the people who serve you in the government's goals. We want to see increased safety in our state. So we're going to start by introducing this panel so you know who's up here. Then I'm going to do some introductions to some folks who are joining us here today in the audience. The introductions from the panelists will be brief, as most of you know them. There are a couple of folks that represent the state that you won't know. And we'll go ahead and do that, and then we'll move to introductions to some of our guests here today. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the format, and then we're going to get straight to your comments and questions so that we can cut to the heart of the matter, okay? Starting with my left here, we'll go to Secretary.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jason Bowie. I'm the Cabinet Secretary for the Department of Public Safety. We'll be brief in our remarks because we want to make sure we leave time for all of you and to listen to your questions. At the end of the day, what we're hoping to understand from the Department of Public Safety is how we can better serve your community. That's been kind of the message of wherever we've traveled. It's easy enough to sit in your office and assume you're on the right track, but until you hear from communities what is needed, we can set our goals and our efforts towards the needs that each community has individually. So we're looking forward to that discussion. I want to thank all the panelists for being on here as well. I'm very gracious to accept this invitation. And I'm sure everybody's very busy, and so thank you for allowing us to be here.
Good evening. Thank you everyone for being here. Troy Wiesler, I'm the Chief of the New Mexico State Police. I would echo everything that Cabinet Secretary Bowie said, and I also would just would state the Four Corners area has a very fond place in my heart. I was stationed up here for 2 years as a uniformed sergeant, and I always very much enjoy coming back here and spending some time in the community and getting to hear from you all. So look forward to this evening. Thank you.
I'm Chief Steve Heavy. I don't believe my mic is working great. There it is. I've been Farmington Police Chief for 10 years or so now, and I've want to thank the state for coming up here. We're kind of off in the corner of the state, and sometimes I think we don't feel like we're heard down in Santa Fe by the legislature and some of the lawmakers. So I appreciate the chance for the state to come up here and listen to our citizens as we have a discussion about some of the crime problems that we face. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Sheriff Shane Ferrari, in my second term as your sheriff, and I do want to thank the governor's office for inviting me to be part of this panel. I do think it's important that we hear from our citizens. We on a local level often hear your frustrations. Sometimes we have to have that difficult discussion to know that it may not always be our actions or our doing, but what may fall within state law or what may be the legislation's decisions. So having them here so we can collectively come together and talk about those topics, I very much appreciate this opportunity. I do also want to recognize that I have a couple of my deputies in attendance, also with a couple of my detectives. So if there are specific individual issues that you would like to discuss and they take some type of formal action, we stand ready to help you out with that. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Farmington Mayor Nate Duckett. Been serving here as elected official since 2014, the last 6 as the mayor of this exciting and up-and-coming community here in northwest New Mexico. We're proud to host this event here tonight at the Farmington Civic Center. We look forward to robust conversation and proud to see our law enforcement officers, deputies, detectives, all here representing their different organizations, and know that they're here tonight to provide answers and help where they can help. So that's what we're here to do. We appreciate you all being here this evening. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome. My name is Rick Tedrow. I'm the district attorney for San Juan County. I'm in my 16th year in that position, 16th and final year in it. It's been an honor to serve as the district attorney here, and I'm hoping that my last couple more months, you guys will still be around and there for me, and especially the community. This has been a wonderful community. It's been an honor to serve it, and I want to continue to serve. So I'm here also if there's any questions or concerns that come up. Just please keep in mind that if it's an active case, a lot of times there's not much discussion once it's in the courtroom on the court side that we can really talk about, but I can also always answer general questions. So thank you for being here, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Thanks. Good evening. My name is Pat Allen. I'm the Secretary of the State Department of Health. Glad to be here, have the opportunity to listen, particularly looking forward to talking about issues or sharing information related to mental health and addiction services and treatment issues and those kinds of things. And look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, panel. It occurred to me as the panel is introducing themselves, having toured many other cities within our state in the last several weeks, not only the depth but the robustness of the relationships that exist between the state, county, electeds, law enforcement, public service folks that work up here. I mean, listening to your district attorney talk about 16 years of tenure in service, listening to Chief Heedy talk about 10 years of being a chief, and then the ongoing and lengthy relationships that I've had with the other elected officials, including the sheriff and the mayor. Really grateful for the coordinated effort that always exists up here in the Four Corners, particularly in Farmington and San Juan County. I think was illustrated, and I won't get into too many details, as recently as yesterday in law enforcement efforts where extreme violence is perpetrated in this community, and law enforcement leans in, and the community leans in, and good results are achieved. And so really grateful for this panel and their expertise. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank the Municipal League for their donation for our refreshments outside, so thank you to the Municipal League. And obviously, Mayor, very grateful for the opportunity to use this venue. It's great. And last but not least, on the thank you side, the incredible staff of the Department of Public Safety, the folks that put together all of the things required to get our message out to every member of the community, both through the live stream and through interpretation. The logistics associated with setting these things up was done by members of the Department of Public Safety staff. Thank you very much for your hard work. It's an excellent job. Okay, I'm going to introduce a couple of distinguished members of the audience. If I get anybody's name wrong, I'm going to apologize in advance if I haven't mentioned before. If I have mentioned before, feel free to punish me appropriately for mispronouncing your name, so I'm very sorry. Starting with city councilors, we have seated in the front row here Herman Buck, Janine Dean Kelly, and Janice Giacchino. I'm sure I got that wrong. I'm very sorry, man. Thank you very much, local governance and legislative leaders in your community. Thank you very much for being in attendance here today. We also have a couple law enforcement leaders that are not up here on the stage that certainly are leaders within our community and very important to the Four Corners area, particularly here in the public safety space. Chief Joe Gonzalez of Aztec Police Department and Chief Francisco of the Bloomfield Police Department are both here. Thank you very much, Chiefs, for being there and your leadership in your public safety agencies. Additionally, we have Region 2 Narcotics Director, which is one of the folks that the sheriff was mentioning, being able to be able here to answer questions. Nima Babadi, thank you very much for being here, Director of Narcotics Task Force, which I think would be unusual if this community was not experiencing a scourge of illegal narcotics, and so I'm sure that the insights from that leader will be important to our discussion here. Also joining us is Farmington Municipal Judge Bill Leese. Thank you, Judge Leese, for being here as well. County Commissioners, Ms. Fortner is here. Thank you very much for being here. And I will say it because I'm not a politician. Our next district attorney, the 11th District 1, Mr. Fortner. Thank you for joining us here. Appreciate your willingness to serve. Last but certainly not least, we have obviously the community members who this not only messaging but communication is for. Thank you for being here. Any members of our United States Armed Services, either serving or veterans, we are grateful for your service and your attendance here today. Thank you very much. And again, the most important piece of this is hearing the voices of the community. So we are going to talk a little bit about the format so that we can get to the business of answering questions and hearing comments from this community, because I think that's important. Everybody is welcome to speak. Obviously, the focal point of this town hall is public safety. However, several intersections exist. We have the Secretary of Health here for the purposes of understanding that there is an intersection between health. There are intersections that exist with housing. There are intersections that exist with our judicial system. And so try to panel folks that will be able to help get us on the right track to stimulate the conversation. But please raise concerns that you have relative to public safety, as they are all important. The ideas generated within these town halls have been significant and have opened certainly my eyes to not only the diversity of the community, but the diversity of the community's needs. And it was mentioned earlier that a lot of these things come down to perceptions of legislative instances. And when you think about that, how important that is state laws will impact every single community with symmetry. So the law in Carlsbad will be the law in Farmington. The law in Tatum will be the law in Raton. Your community's needs need to be heard, because if they are not, they will not be properly contemplated. So the person who is at the front of that line pitching ideas to our legislative body on what we can do to help mitigate, reduce, ameliorate our criminal experiences that we're having. There is no such thing as too much input or too much data, so we're really grateful. So please don't hold back with your comments, your questions, and most importantly, your ideas towards solutions. The great thing about the town halls that have preceded this one is that folks got immediately past the notion of whatever has held us back in the past and are working towards solutions. And that's something that I'm really grateful for the opportunity to do tonight. So in terms of the format, we have a couple lovely DPS employees that are standing at the back near these microphones. We will turn this program over to you. When you have something to say, please raise your hand. One of the employees will come up to you and bring you the mic so that everybody can hear you. And most importantly, the folks that can hear you online, be mindful again when you're speaking for our interpreters. And then we will figure out who's the best or who's the combination of the best folks to be able to answer your questions. Also leaning on the subject matter experts that are here from the New Mexico State Police and from all other public safety law enforcement agencies, including Farmington, San Juan County, Bloomfield, and Aztec. We also have members of our cabinet and our executive staff here representing the fields like the Department of Corrections. So again, multiple intersections. So please feel free to ask whatever's on your mind, and then we'll do the best to answer. We have a hard stop time where the building has to close and the lights have to go off, but that comes well after our scheduled stop time, so don't worry about any of those things, and please feel free to take your time and explain what your situation is. With all that said, who will be the first among us to raise the first question? Don't everybody hear it at once. All right, Farmington, where do we want to start? We want to start with some of the legislative proposals that were proposed in an emergency special session called by the governor related to public safety. That, as you know, was not heard. None of those bills were debated, and thusly none of those bills became law. That was something that has been raised in most other communities. We talked quite a bit about the emerging trend related to juveniles and violence, particularly violent crimes being committed with firearms by folks who shouldn't be allowed to possess them, particularly felons or our children. Those topics are things that are regularly discussed. And I know this community values the safety of its student body and its children specifically. So that might be a place, if anybody's interested in raising something related to that, if you're experiencing that here. Yes, sir.
I know once somebody goes first, somebody else is willing to go second, so I'll be first. But I don't think any of you can answer this. Based on what you just said, we're not teaching our young people how to handle conflict. And conflict leads to crimes of various natures. So I just wanted to make that comment. Could we somehow, and maybe people are, maybe there are already ways and means of teaching conflict management to our students, or adults for that matter as well, maybe too late for them. But are there efforts underway in that area?
Sir, can I get your name just so I can respond to your first name's fine?
Ron Price.
Ron, thank you very much for your question, sir. And I think he raises an important one. I'll give some of the other panelists an opportunity to respond because I think there's a bunch of different perspectives here. I know that we have police officers in our schools. I am raising 2 young boys of my own. I live in Albuquerque. I'm going to give you a couple of interesting stats that I think not only back up what Mr. Price has said. You happen to have one here. You have a juvenile detention center in this community and have had one. They are becoming further and fewer between within the state of New Mexico. And the reason why I mention that is because in addition to not managing how to handle conflict and how it escalates, there also seems to be an absence of immediacy of accountability for our young folks that I'm experiencing with regularity. And I'm going to let you know a couple of things that are important to understand from a global perspective. And one of them is that of the 50 people incarcerated in the youth detention center in Bernalillo County, so your equivalent of your detention center here, 60% of them are incarcerated for first-degree murder committed with a firearm. And that is a sobering statistic and is troubling to say the least. A year ago, last month, I experienced a shooting incident in my son's football practice perpetrated by a 13-year-old an arm's length away from my 12-year-old son. I've been a police officer for 28 years, and when something surprises me, it's significant. That surprised me. What I noticed, and I will tell you just candidly, because I think it's important in these discussions that we're forthright, an absence of willingness to do anything but shoot in that shooting incident that I witnessed. And what I mean by that is there was no physical altercation, there was no verbal altercation, there was a negotiated time and place, it appeared, used by a digital device because of how far away they approached each other from, and immediately went to shoot. And so I'm experiencing visually and by proxy the exact things you're talking about is there were none of the other normative processes that go into conflict, and more particularly to the question, its resolution. So the evidence in my world I have seen is everywhere that the youth are prone to instantaneous hyper-violence in a way that I've never seen during my career. And I'm going to let some of the other panelists weigh in on some of their experiences, and then we'll circle back to the notion of what is being done about that, what can be done about that, and what this community's ideas are relative to that, because I think they're very important. And I have a couple ideas. Who would like to weigh in on this from the panel? Go ahead, sir.
Again, Pat Allen, Department of Health. I'm a public health guy, and what we think about in public health is prevention. It's not core to what we as a state agency do, but what school districts at the local level do is focus on something that, for reasons that I don't fully understand, has become kind of a political hot button, but it's really important, and it's called social emotional learning. It's the idea of starting with kids at the very youngest ages to understand and recognize what their feelings are, to be able to know that they're angry and call it that, and be able to understand and learn from the very earliest grades and ages how to respond appropriately to those feelings. And there's a whole developed curriculum that goes with that work that gets done at the school level. And what the governor has done is worked even earlier to significantly expand free access to high-quality preschool, so that that kind of work with kids about those kinds of topics can start as early as possible. And I think while it's the sort of thing that, you know, it is going to take time to be able to show benefit, those are the kinds of prevention investments that we need to be able to make to teach kids how to recognize those feelings and be able to appropriately channel them and respond to them, and not, you know, go straight from zero to gunfire, as Ben was just talking about.
Anyone else from the panel want to weigh in? So, thank you, Secretary Allen. I think that's really important, because one of the things that occurred to me is there's two poles to this, right? There's the, and we need to be doing both. There's the prevention aspect, so all of the effort needs to be piled into what can we do to change the vector that we are currently on. And then there's the realistic, and I mean the real, honest, forward-facing truth of where we find ourselves today. And for most people in this audience, they can reflect on what that looks like relative to when they were the same age, and how it doesn't look anything like what they experienced. We were down in Las Cruces 2 weeks ago. First day of school, 2 guns found in their school. The law enforcement agency there, Chief Story, is doing a very proactive job in their school district, combing proactively social media. And the reason why that's important is because many of our young people are forecasting and then broadcasting their possession of firearms inside places like the school. We had 15 firearms located in Albuquerque public schools during the last school year. And when I think about schools and guns intersecting, sometimes my brain goes to backpacks or gun racks, way back in the day, trunks, things like that. That is not what we're experiencing. These are guns in waistbands in proximity to the teacher and other students. And I say that, again, not to do anything other than be honest and sobering with the truth of what we're facing, is that there is a cultural change that is undertaken from the time I was a child and when you were a child to what we're experiencing now, and it is impacting every one of our communities. Artesia, New Mexico, a 14-year-old shot and killed a person in that community. We are having to contemplate on the state level laws, and I can't even imagine what DA Tedrow has to deal with in his world. What do you do when the criminal offender is not contemplated under the construct of the law because of their extreme young age, right, on the accountability side? And again, to the Secretary's point, I think we've missed the mark when a person gets to that place. And it's really troubling to think that we have such a high frequency of folks who are going to spend perhaps the rest of their life incarcerated for decisions that were made when they were young people, which is why I suggest and why I hope that we could get support, not only from this community, but from all New Mexicans, to do whatever is necessary to invest in preventative measures to keep kids from getting to that place. And so I'm very interested if anybody from the community has any input on what they think would be helpful. I think all the investment strategies, all the removing of barriers related to being impoverished, not having enough to eat, not having places to live, all of these things intersect and factor in. But any other ideas are certainly are welcome, and I'd be interested to hear what you're experiencing here in Farmington, because I think that that's an important litmus to what's happening in some of our larger cities. Thank you for the question, sir. Appreciate it. Does anybody want to weigh in on that, or obviously any other questions or comments perhaps? Yes.
So
They'll bring it down to you.
okay,
If you could start with your name, ma'am, so we
I will.
thank you.
All right. My name is Deborah Moyu. I'm an educator here in Farmington at Pedro Vista High School. I'm also a journalist, so I'm going to say that, and I am taking notes for the Tri-City Record newspaper. But as far as schools and youth in our schools, there is social emotional learning in the elementary school. It gets more difficult when you get into the higher grades, and I think that one of the things that we really need in our state is more access to good mental health services for our youth. And it's not there. I mean, if a child in this community commits some type of crime of violence, maybe not, or maybe just loses it in a classroom and attacks a teacher or something, and they take them to the hospital because they're having a mental episode, they get shipped down to Las Cruces, Doñana County, Mesilla Valley, and then they come back, and sometimes they're better, sometimes they're not. UNM Health Service has some youth behavioral health services there where kids can go for inpatient treatment, but we have nothing like that here. And that is something that we really, really need here. And I'm saying that as a teacher, not as a reporter.
Thank you, Deborah. I appreciate the comment, the information. I'll let Secretary Allen take a couple steps at available services, because one of the things that's important and will be part of our discussion here, and you raised some really good points, is how early must the intervention start, right, to be effective, because that's important too when we're talking about evidence that exists that we've missed the mark for a 13-year-old, for example, which I sadly was able to witness with my own 2 eyes. Begs the question of, well, when must we start, and what should that look like? And then, again, I think it's all the things, not just a thing. And then, what happens when we do have an incident? Let's say a precursor incident. Let's say a predicate incident. Let's say an incident that's not nearly as extreme as the examples that I gave. What are we doing to then intervene at that point if we have marginally missed the mark, let's say, or if there's a person that's needing additional services? And I think that's a really important capacity discussion. It's a really important discussion for the community to be on an awareness, because I will tell you, some of the men and women in this room are the folks who get called when that is experienced. Because, and that's why this is so appropriate for a public safety discussion, is children in New Mexico, because of the way our law is written, don't commit crimes. They commit delinquent acts, with very few exceptions. And I'll let the esteemed district attorney correct me if any of my legal piece is wrong, but the bottom line is most of the things, including what you described, are not crimes, they're delinquent acts. And what the goal is, it's rehabilitation correction. And so if the root of the problem lies in behavioral health, mental health, substance abuse disorder, whatever the situation is, what does that look like? And then more importantly, how do the men and women in this room who are the first responders who are intersecting with that, and the men and women who do instructional and educational work as professionals is important too. Where are these folks supposed to go, and what is the probability of getting better? And if there are gaps, vacancies, or places that need improvement, what do those look like from this community's perspective? Sounds like I heard proximity immediately. So when we're talking about San Juan County to Doñana County, we're talking about the polls, right? Like it didn't get any further than that. So I think that's one place to start. But let's hear what Secretary Allen has to say about what the state's capacity is relative to that, and then what role the local community looks like relative to subcontract services supported by the state looks like kind of statewide, and see where that takes us. Secretary?
Yeah, thanks. 4 things about that. First, just to come back again, as you did as well, to social and emotional learning, it's making an investment at that early stage to begin building habits and if you will, muscle memory for kids is really important and pays benefits later. Investment in school-based health centers, I think, is probably the second thing to focus on. Those are a partnership with the local school district and the local school board, and they get to kind of pick and choose a little bit what are the services that get offered in a particular area. We're really trying to expand behavioral health services available through school-based health centers. We think that's really important. But that gets to kind of the third issue, which is we do have, like every other state does, I don't want to argue that New Mexico is different, but every state has a challenge with enough providers. And we need more of everything everywhere. We've begun leaning into trying to work to recruit providers to the state. And we have a pretty attractive package of different kinds of loan repayments and incentives and tax credits and those kinds of things to try to expand that base of providers. And then in terms of facility level care, you're exactly right. I think there are challenges in providing residential treatment for kids. And a big piece of that is the acuity, how sick kids are, has gone off the charts over the last few years. This is something that predated the pandemic. I don't think we can let ourselves off the hook to say, well, you know, the pandemic created all this. We were seeing these elevations in acuity starting well before that. I don't think we have a good, excuse me, a good understanding of why that is. But it's really driving challenges in the provider systems, because you've got providers out there that are able to provide services, but I'm going to be categorical, which I usually try not to be, and say nobody is really scaled to deal with the level of challenge that we see now, which is why you're seeing people go off to Mesilla Valley, great facility, but you mentioned sometimes they come back better, sometimes they don't, and I think that's part of the challenge. So I do think we have a lot of work to do across state agencies and at the community level to try to figure out what are those resources that we need to create. The governor and the legislature have created a fund to invest in expanding healthcare facility capacity across the state. I hope we'll see more money go into that fund in this next legislative session, and we can begin to start getting even more creative with the kinds of expansions that we see to be able to do that sort of work.
Thank you, Secretary. Anybody on the panel want to add to what the Secretary said relative to their experiences? No? Deborah, thank you very much for not only the question, but what it does is stimulate the action item, which is what can be done. And what I hear, and what I think I'm hearing correctly, is that there is a need. There are escalators, in this case proximity, among other things, but there are also capacity issues. So what is needed is support from this community and New Mexico relative to efforts to expand and fund those programs. There's also a piece to this, and we talked about public safety intersects with these other places, and I've learned in my travels throughout our state, the willingness of a community to bring on folks who will provide those services, to accommodate their requests, relative to business work and community welcoming, housing, all of the things that come with trying to open up a place that will do things that the community needs, don't just apply to other industries, they apply to all of them uniformly, and this one particularly. And I think that that's an important piece for this community to take away, and that I have certainly learned in my discussions with other communities, is making sure that your community is as fertile and as willing to invest in that piece, so that they are able to focus their efforts towards rehabilitation, correction, wellness, and availability, which is really important. And I think there is a proximity issue to that. If you don't have access to the treatment, the likelihood of getting it decreases. And that's a really important metric to understand, so that the stakes of that are pretty high, because the alternative is sheriff, the chief, the men and women of law enforcement, and the men and women of corrections in this room. They do have the infrastructure, do have the facilities, do have the things. If this community or any other New Mexican community has a choice of investing in prevention or investing in incarceration, the choice is easy for New Mexicans, and I know that. And so making sure that turns into an action item to this community, I think, is an important takeaway. So Deborah, really appreciate you raising that, and thank you for your dual roles. We appreciate a member of the press being here to help us spread the word, and as well as your job, I don't want to rank them in order, but your job educating your children. Thank you for that. Who's next? Who would like to go next? Yes, sir.
My name is Don Ortiz. I've been in the school system for over 30 years, and I think Deborah and Ron would both agree that with the broken window theory, you address smaller things, that bigger infractions don't happen. And I'm just wondering if this has been applied at any level. And also, I would like to thank Chief Hebby and our mayor for your expectations of our police department. They've always been very professional in dealing with anything we dealt with in school. So, thank you, Chief.
Before I get to your question, if you don't mind answering that, there's a lot of law enforcement in the room. I'm the Secretary for the Department of Public Safety. I wouldn't feel like I'm doing my job to thank you for what you guys do each and every day. I know thank you was already said at the very beginning. I just want all of you to understand and know that we do our best to advocate for you for the things that you need across the state of New Mexico, whether that be through legislation, through the Law Enforcement Academy, through our new Law Enforcement Certification Board, and the Standards and Training Council. And often law enforcement in uniform always is the one that's thought of first, but I will also recognize and thank our professional staff that supports law enforcement, all of our dispatchers and communicators across the state of New Mexico. And so if you ever need something from us from DPS, I will be glad to lean in for that. Please let us know what it is that you need, and That's just my shameless plug real quick, sir. Thank you for your patience before I got to your question there. I think one of the things that's really important for us, as law enforcement as a whole always, is to try to get back to a place where we can address issues within the community that really address quality of life. Currently, within law enforcement, I think most communities are suffering from this, where we are taking priority calls for service and going from call to call to call. And law enforcement officers don't really have the opportunity as much as they used to be able to really kind of dig in and address the quality of life issues, what's important to that particular neighborhood, what's important to that particular youth that we come into contact with, and so forth, those lower level issues that you're talking about. I had the privilege of being at a Albuquerque Metro Crime Stoppers luncheon earlier today, and some officers were recognized for just that, at finding the time to do those things in our community. And I think those things are so important, and I have advocated for that as we talk about legislation, and as my counterpart here, Ben, mentioned, all of the bills that we talk about to address felons in possession and some of those things. It'd really be nice if we can get legislation, get us focused on things to keep the hardened criminals off of our streets, so that we can get back to what you refer to as the broken windows theory, and what I like to refer to as policing from a point of view of addressing quality of life. I have 27 years of experience with the city of Rio Rancho, and it was always my most rewarding piece within any community, is really to try to address and solve problems for a community member, whatever that might be, whether it be financially, physical issues that they couldn't address, mental health issues, whatever those are, sometimes just taking the time to help a parent with a child who otherwise doesn't have a role model in the family. And I think most law enforcement officers find the most reward in that piece of policing. The difficulty really becomes for any law enforcement agency, and I think any chief up here or sheriff might agree, is that we have to, of course, address the priority one calls, as we refer to them as those things that are really putting life and limb in jeopardy for people. And as long as we're doing those things, as long as we're chasing hardened criminals on our streets, these police officers will never have the time to really address some of those things. It's not an excuse by any stretch. I'm certain everyone does their best to do so, but when I was in the city of Rio Rancho, there was a period of time we had a new chief that came in, and he discussed changing priority one calls and response time to some of those things. And it was his opinion, and it was his right to have it, was that some of those things could wait. Some of those things, the other things that people were calling for could wait, and we need to take care of some of these other things. And I was really kind of disappointed by that one, because when I worked in that community, I was always very proud that if someone called for a police officer, you had your car broken in the morning, it's not the biggest crime working, naturally, but it's a big deal to you. At the end of the day, you've been violent, you're trying to go to work, you're trying to figure out what happened overnight, you want a police officer to come and take that police report. And we were always very proud to be able to provide a police officer within minutes of the call coming in. And we started getting to a place where we were getting away from that. And so I will always feel very strongly about that. I think at the end of the day, when you pick up the phone and you call for emergency services, whether that's EMS, fire, or police, that you should get it in short order. And so I completely agree with you on that. And that's why it's so important for us to get support on things such as felon possession or fire. We have, I won't go through the whole list of bills, but there were many things that we were trying to address through some of those bills. These law enforcement officers are arresting the same people over and over and over. And every time they go before the court, they're deemed incompetent, and therefore they're within a matter of hours, they are right back on the streets, creating more havoc. And it goes back to kind of what she mentioned earlier about kind of the accountability side. We're not sending a strong message to anyone in our community that you will be held accountable for crime. So I really appreciate the way that you're looking at things. I agree. I have a different phrase, quality of life. You're calling it broken windows theory, but our ideas are completely aligned. So thank you for the comments.
Don, correct?
Don.
So thank you for the comment. I'll say a couple of things about broken windows. So I think that law enforcement, much like society, right, we have a pendulum, kind of swings back and forth from time to time. We've seen a lot of that in the last few years. So when I started law enforcement, broken windows was very, was what was taught, what was the way of doing business kind of at the time. And for those of y'all that don't know, so broken windows, like the very brief synopsis, right, is the idea, and Don mentioned a little bit, but that if you take care of the little problems and you address the little things, and you have low tolerance, zero tolerance, or of the smaller issues, and a lot of the bigger issues never happen. And so that was a very popular way for law enforcement for a while. I think that we maybe have seen a few issues with that, but I think we can, I would at least personally say that the pendulum went too far the other way. There wasn't accountability on little things. And so one of the things that's really been an emphasis for me and for state police continually, but especially a focus since I've taken over, is an example, is traffic enforcement, right? A foundational piece of public safety is visible traffic enforcement, not just from the standpoint of, safety on the roadways, but also people need to see or want to see individuals that are breaking the law, that they want to see that there's some semblance of order, on their morning commute, on their whatever the case may be. If somebody is driving recklessly, if somebody is, whatever the case may be, somebody's driving drunk, they want to see some repercussions happening. When that doesn't happen, you see the negative results. I mean, I've been in Albuquerque a good chunk, the last decade pretty much. In that area, I mean, there's good chunks of that city that people know that there's no traffic enforcement. They don't expect to see a cop. They never see a cop. So what happens? Like, the driving gets worse and worse, and the next thing you know, we have all these other issues. And so, luckily, I think that the pendulum is swinging back to more, maybe a smarter version now, a more focused version of broken windows. But we see that every day. That the little things, taking care of the little things, means a lot of times we don't have to take care of the big things, because the big problems never happen, because the little problems were addressed. And that prevented the big problems from ever occurring. So, thank you.
Go ahead, Chief.
So, I think, first of all, good to see you, Don. But I think throughout my career, we've seen the public tolerance for crime, kind of shift. And what I've always said is, the better the police do their job, the less the public knows what we do. So in the 1990s, I mean, you had Bill and Hillary Clinton talking about wilding in New York City, and there was a palpable fear among the American public. And I was a line level officer, and there was a lot of encouragement for the police. And people wanted the police in their neighborhoods, and they wanted us being aggressive and making arrests. And that really changed as police were more successful, and fears of violent crime in particular declined. More scrutiny turned in the late 2000s to the police and how we did business. And we wound up moving away from the broken windows theory and started to catch phrases like mass incarceration, which there's an element of truth to that. So part of broken windows was making arrests and holding people accountable at lower levels. What we didn't, and you still hear it today. I mean, so in some ways we've made no progress in 33 years, which can be depressing to say. But we have the same problems affecting the people who are committing those lower level crimes. It's a lot of drug abuse. It's a lot of alcohol abuse. It's a lot of mental problems. And we sit here tonight and we start talking about them, and we're certainly not better. In many ways, we are significantly worse than we were in the 1990s of being able to deliver those services. So I am for strict accountability. I would like to see more arrests for minor offenses, but I don't want them just going to jail and sitting there, and then they get back out, and there's been no progress because the underlying issues were never addressed. It's the drug abuse, it's the alcohol abuse, it's the mental problems. So the other part of the last several years in the mass incarceration discussion, and that goes to pretrial release, something I think we'll talk more about as the night goes on, is we lost our belief and our understanding that there actually is true evil. And some people absolutely belong in jail, and they should be there for a long, long time. They are not fit to function in society safely, and we've lost that some. So I am very much for some of the programs that we are exploring as a state, young adult court and drug court and mental health court. I'm all for those as ways to get to the foundational levels for some of the smaller crimes that we see, more to the broken windows theory. But I am much more for this guy that stepped out of a car and fired 50 rounds at a state police officer in our community 2 days ago should be sitting in jail for the longest of times. And I know that won't be necessarily the most politically correct thing, but he should not see the light of day for many, many months. And the fact that he could have killed a police officer, so we got on HB4 a number of years ago, and I know you all heard it too. HB4 is the holding bad cops accountable. And we got on that, and we were really championing that. And here we are, 4 years later. Recruiting police officers is a difficult business. We now are much worse than we were 4 years ago as a state in having police officers to deploy. But we somehow are still fumbling around when somebody steps out of a car and fires 50 rounds at a cop. That guy should be in jail and a long time, and we'll see it. When we had a police officer shot here in Farmington just a few short years ago, he was point blank range with a prisoner who escaped from Colorado. So he's a felon. He's escaped jail. He comes down to Farmington. He's involved in a DUI incident and flees. Our officers respond in the middle of the night when everybody else is in bed. There he is standing there talking to this guy. He doesn't really know who he is yet. And as he's talking, it's clear to the suspect he's not going to be allowed to leave. And he pulls out a gun and shoots the officer. The officer shrinks back and throws up his elbow. The bullet hits him in the elbow instead of the head. He lives. When we go to sentencing and we go to trial decisions, he got 10 years to serve, so about 85% of that under the federal system, for being a felon in possession. The open discussion was he was maybe facing 13 or 14 years for shooting a police officer in the state, and he'd do about half of that and be out in less time than he was going to do with the state. So there's really concrete things that we should be doing. One, to send a message to the men and women that are going out and doing the job and the dangers they face. And the fact that we're having increasing difficulties filling our ranks, there should be a message to us that we need to be there for them. But then just two, there are all sorts of things that we should be doing to help people on the lower levels, kind of the broken window theory, but with help. But on the upper levels, we really need to be holding people far more accountable for some of the heinous acts we see. Thank you.
Anyone else in the panel? Very good. Thank you, Don, for the comment, the question. A couple things that are important that I researched while we were listening to our panel chiefs and secretary, all of which I agree with and I think are wise, not only experiences, but also words. So recruitment and retention, very difficult in this profession, right? So the state of New Mexico and your legislature funded millions of dollars, which we have distributed to every law enforcement agency seated in this room, and all of these leaders up on the stage and seated out here in the audience. The law enforcement folks are doing what they can do. And I had a debate recently with a legislator who, many of which were unwilling to hear the governor's solutions to many of the issues just raised here in this special session. And it was implied that folks don't want to get in law enforcement because of the specter of corruption related to excessive use of force. And I not only respectfully, but I adamantly disagree. There are bad professionals in every profession, and they're dealt with in a manner that's appropriate for their things. Every law enforcement officer in this room doesn't do it for the money. They do it because something called to them on the left side of their body. The people that are struggling in the ranks that we are struggling to fill today are because the bullet dodging has increased by a factor of 10 from the time I started doing this on the good guy's side. And the accountability for the bad guys has gone down significantly. Your governor pushed very hard to force our legislature into that debate. They were unwilling to have it. And I say that because that's true. Not one bill was heard on one committee, not one argument. Not everyone in this room is going to agree on every topic. Not everyone in that roundhouse is going to agree. But to agree that this needs no attention, to me, is ludicrous. And it really flies in the face of some of the efforts that are being made. So why are we having to pour hundreds of millions of dollars into these things to try and help our communities via the state and the legislature to recruit and retain the best police officers? To the chief's point, what is the root cause? And I think the root cause is extreme violence. And I agree with the secretary's comment related to if we continue to treat particularly violent felons who choose to arm themselves, it alienates divisions within the law-abiding community related to topics like firearms, which is not the topic of discussion. The topic of discussion is the firearms in the hands of a felon. And on that, most folks agree. That's a problem. Most of the folks that are arrested for being a felon in possession of a firearm in the state of New Mexico, the charges pled away. It was a 4th-degree felony for 25 years of my career. It is now a 3rd-degree felony. The sentence is almost always probation, and the frequency of it being charged is going to increase by at least 30% this calendar year over a New Mexico all-time record. So the vector on that is going up. That problem is not getting better. We must do something, because I agree with Chief Weisler precisely. The little things are the big things. But right now, we are having to struggle acutely with a person getting out of their vehicle and shooting a rifle at our police officers unprovoked. It is difficult for these men and women to do both, and I think the takeaway, the action item for this community is support of common sense, accountability measures for criminal enhancement for those folks who have clearly separated themselves from the rest of society. And I agree with Chief Hebe. There are folks that need our help, and we should be pouring our effort into that. Accountability for the folks who are unwilling to follow society's rules, particularly related to possession of firearms subsequent to a felony conviction. That is universal. Murdered police officers are almost always perpetrated against by felons who possess firearms. The second piece that's an action item in terms of your support is how we help support culturally. And I forgot to introduce her when she was here, but I see seated near the front row is our former U.S. Marshal and our current Law Enforcement Academy Director, Sonia Chavez, who is seated in the front. Her job is extraordinarily important to the state of New Mexico. She runs the programmatic side of DPS that deals with not only the certification, the discipline of the licensure of police officers and public safety telecommunicators, but maybe more precisely to this discussion, what are the training methodologies? What are the new movements that need to be undertaken to handle some of the discussions that were raised earlier relative to mental health, relative to broken windows? And it's great because we have an incredible leader working right now in a place, and we're very lucky to have her in that role with all of her kind of breadth of experience. What does the next era of New Mexico law enforcement training and certification look like? Because I agree with you. I was raised in the chief. I was raised in broken windows. I knew the names of all the kids in my beat in the city of Albuquerque. We played basketball on Saturdays. I knew all the business owners. The days of that are behind us, and I think we need to reintroduce what that looks like. But in order to do that, we must have the personnel to be able to achieve the things that were discussed. So I think we heard from our experts up here that they agree with you. I can certainly say from a personal perspective, I agree with you. In a place where this community and Mexicans can be actionable in what the steps they take is supporting common sense legislation that will hold to account extraordinarily violent offenders, supporting economically funding programs that will help us recruit and retain the best police officers in New Mexico, and then supporting our New Mexico Law Enforcement Academy as it undertakes what should a contemporary New Mexico police training module look like, and what should the accountability guardrails look like to satisfy both ends for this community. Thank you very much for raising that, sir. I appreciate you. Yes, please do, Chief.
So, I actually am glad I didn't hear the comment made by the legislator, but that's some of the mentality that is in Santa Fe right now. And that's not just a laughable and an insulting comment, it's actually just a disgraceful comment. For one of our elected leaders to be talking about the reason that I can't hire police officers is because of the culture of corruption surrounding use of force is just disgraceful and unbelievably ignorant. It is flat not true. And for people to be in the roundhouse trying to divine how they're going to help keep our citizens safe with that kind of ignorance is really difficult to tolerate. So the solution that they came up with is, we badmouth the police in the worst way we've ever done as a nation into now we can't get cops. And so the solution now is we'll just throw a bunch of money at it and that'll fix everything. And it doesn't fix everything because people weren't doing the job in the first place for the money. Yeah, it's good, and I want my officers to have a good living, but that was not the core reason, and frankly, I don't want them to have that as the core reason. You do policing for public service. You do policing to protect your country, to protect your community. But they don't understand that. And so then they get into a comment like that. Well, they don't understand the foundational reasons you become a cop, so how could they possibly come up with a reason or a way to fix it? And they go to something that idiotic. That's actually just a disgraceful comment. So I'm proud of you, Mr. Baker. You weren't arrested for any sort of scene that you caused when you heard that comment. I can't say that I would have been as happy to have heard that comment. I know I'm not tonight. I will tell you, we are way short in our officer numbers across the state. That is a relatively new phenomenon. We were not in that kind of shape in 2019. And then with the protests and some of the legislation you saw and the need to hold officers accountable in HB4 and some of the other legislation, we drove ourselves right into the point where people don't really want to do the job. And we're mystified as to why. And it's really not that big a mystery. It is a demanding profession. We hold officers accountable significantly. Everything they do is reviewed. My officers, every use of force they have is reviewed. They have body camera footage on them at all times. So we really scrutinize the heck out of our officers. We also need to support them. So that goes back to if that legislator would like to know one thing they could do that would actually make a difference, let's pass a law that holds that guy in jail for 25 years for shooting 50 rounds at a cop on the streets of Farmington. Those are the kind of things.
I'll go ahead and add to that also. I tell you, the lowest numbers I've seen in our agency were right after what we've seen after George Floyd, when many of our politicians used that as a weapon, a political weapon, to garner support. It was a hot topic at the time. I had officers leave my agency to get totally out of the profession. And the difficulty in recruiting, it's nothing like I've ever seen before. I remember just a year prior to that, I was at the San Juan County Fair, and we had people coming down by our booth, young people that I felt would make good officers, men and women, and asking them, have you ever thought about an interesting career in law enforcement? And look at me, smile, almost laugh, and they'd say, no way. There's no way I want to do that. And unfortunately, by using the tactics that they used, we see time and time again now people directly not only targeting law enforcement, but trying to embarrass law enforcement quite often. Who wants a job where you have to worry about seeing yourself on Facebook because somebody's trying to embarrass you, somebody's trying to set you up constantly? They've emboldened criminals right now to paint us as the bad guy. There are so few law enforcement officers that are corrupt, but every one of us get the bad eye. And as we know in here, there are bad teachers, there are bad coaches, but as us are the protectors of the peace, those that have the trust of society to govern, or not to govern, but enforce the laws, it's very difficult for us to do our job because they peg us against individuals that are doing wrong, law enforcement officers that truly shouldn't be law enforcement officers across the country, but we bear the brunt of that. So how do we find new recruits with everything they're facing again, all the negativity? We see it in the media. The media always putting the hottest stories on there are police corruption stories, or taking stories that aren't even police corruption, trying to slant it in a way to give any type of distrust towards law enforcement. And again, we get no apology from these individuals that weaponize this. There's no I'm sorry. All they do is throw more money at the problem. Retention bonuses. More pay for their officers, which they appreciate, don't get me wrong. But to go out there every day, some of those officers, seeing during some of those protests, how do you show up on the line every day, a riot line every day, go home and know you've got to go back and face that again? But one thing I will say about San Juan County, we feel the love in San Juan County, we feel your support. I don't know how they do it in those areas. I couldn't do it in those areas, but I just want to thank all of you for your support. And we feel your love. We feel your support every day. And I just want to thank you for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sheriff. Yes, sir. Or do we have somebody over here first? I don't want to go out of line. Yeah, we'll go here and then we'll go to you, sir.
My name is Pat Lucero, and I would like to echo what Baker and Sheriff Ferrari had said. But one of the most important things that I've seen, and Baker mentioned, this is not the 80s, this is not the 90s, it's a different culture that we live in. But one of the things that I appreciate about the community I live in is the constant presence, the community policing from our officers. We don't see that a lot in the larger cities because they're doing other things. They're dealing with drug problems, the addict problems, the domestic violence problems, but we don't see a lot of them. Again, back in Bloomfield, we do see the police presence, and where we see police at most often, we see a lot less crime. And the other thing is, what I'm hearing is the money towards behavioral health components, which is very important, but we don't see the reverence of respect for law enforcement in schools. That should be taught at a very early age. I remember whenever I was a child, seeing the importance of firefighters, seeing the importance of police officers, seeing the importance and value of nursing or any kind of public safety or even educators. We don't see that today in our education. And I think that's very important. We should put a focus towards that. Again, I appreciate the law enforcement officers who serve, who have to deal with the public ridicule. I would like to see our legislation, our representatives who represent us, pay a little bit more respect also, as Sheriff Ferrari mentioned, to our law enforcement officers. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Appreciate that. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was kind of curious to understand what thought process went through in the governor's office when they got rid of qualified immunity and what that did to the police ranks. I think I would never recommend anyone to take a job in law enforcement without qualified immunity. It puts you in a position of knowing that you have no trust from the government that you're working for. And I think it's just a policy that further erodes their ability to be able to bring in recruits and us to be able to enjoy a safe environment with professional police force. They're having to take who comes through the door to a certain extent. I know they beat them out, but I don't think the governor has done anything to help our local law enforcement, our state law enforcement, to become the professional force that they need to be in order to keep us safe. I just want to know what thought process was going on down there when they got rid of qualified immunity, something that has stood forever as a safeguard for a young man or a young woman facing what they face daily on the street. Now I think you've got a hesitation to take action because now you're thinking about legal liability that you can come across, especially as the sheriff said, with people filming everything that you do.
What is your name, sir? Great question. What is your name, sir?
Mike Lewis.
Mike, thank you very much for the question, Mike. I like to be able to use your name. So a couple things. I think maybe the most important thing, so I don't disagree with the notion that removing things that make professionals in whatever profession feel more indemnified is problematic. The most important thing, and this is not a civics lesson for anybody, assuredly, as we just saw in the most recent session, this legislation is legislated by the legislators. Bills are signed, and you talk about that, and I think that's what you're really talking about, is what thought process went into the sign.
Signed by the government.
Right, that's
refused to sign.
Yeah, that's what I think the core of your question is not how did we get there, is that what was the choice made relative to signing or not signing a piece of legislation. And I will tell you, it would be very difficult for me to inform you, particularly at a time when I wasn't working there, what thought processes went into the governor's decision to sign pieces of legislation or not. But what I will tell you is you do have a governor who pushed extraordinarily hard to get 7 bills that do things to restore some of the things that you're talking about, that do things to increase confidence in police officers. I sit in the office and I consult with the governor and executive staff related to what are pieces of legislation that we can do that will empower police officers. So I'm going to talk about a couple of them. Some of them are just straight crime pieces, and you've heard a couple of them. I find, and I think anybody that's listened to me for any period of time, that felons who possess firearms are the single largest contributing factor to the violence within our community, particularly perpetrated against our law enforcement officers. I will not beat that dead horse anymore. I also don't think there's a ton of argument about that, except when I step into the roundhouse. And so I mentioned that caveat because that's an important piece. The second piece has to do with rearresting the same folks, and it goes to the comment that was made earlier related to broken windows. When we continually arrest a person for 80 times at an interval, and we have 16,000 cases dismissed since 2017 for criminal competency, we are sending our men and women to do a job using a tool, that being the criminal justice system, that does not work for that person. The court has already determined this person is not appropriate for criminal justice. Our solution in New Mexico has been put them back out on the streets and let them reoffend. It does a variety of different things, including waste the resources of the men and women who do first responding, the support folks who do all of the dispatching and all the logistical work, the jail, the courts, on and on, right? The appellate courts, all of the things. One of the things that we are trying to do hard, and I think that this is really important, is to try and cover what does accountability look like. And I will tell you, I struggled with this. I was the law enforcement academy director for 2 years, so I was training men and women in our law enforcement academy, many of which have come from these agencies. And you have incredible police agencies here in the northwest corner of New Mexico, I will tell you. And you know that, and that's great, and I'm glad that this community appreciates them, because I certainly do. How do you explain to these young men and women, because I think of myself when I was a 21-year-old recruit, how do you explain to men and women with precision about what this means? Because I do agree with you. Hesitation equals danger for the officer, for the community, for everybody, for the profession. And I think that can resonate. I think there's lots of opinions about what qualified immunity means and doesn't mean relative to the actual indemnification of the officer. I don't offer this as an excuse, but one of the things that I made my business when I was in the business of consulting with these young men and women by the hundreds was, all right, where's a case study since this law has changed relative to a police officer having their assets attacked? Where is a case study to what the real impact of this thing is? Because that's one thing we find all the time. We pass laws and we find out, oh, that didn't mean what we thought it meant, or that means way more than we thought it meant in the alternative. And what I think we really have, so thus far, I do not have a whole lot of stories to share with those young men and women about, here's the real negative pitfall. I can think of 50 felon in possessions who've murdered a person within our community off the top of my head, but I struggle on the other side of that. So what I think we largely are dealing with, because again, it's a historical fact, this is the world we're living with, is the perception match the reality of what the actual impact is? And if it doesn't, what can we do as a community, as professionals, as trainers, what can we do to make sure that everybody is on not only an equal understanding, but a sufficiency threshold of what it actually means? What does that law impact? Not just perceptually, but in reality. Because I think that's important, because what ends up happening then is an absence of information or incomplete information. Gaps get filled in, perceptions get altered, and they may not be reflective of the reality. And so while I agree with you fundamentally and wholeheartedly that the direction, the vector needs to be the removal of things that will disincentivize folks from joining this profession. We must figure out how we actually rectify the understanding and make sure it matches the reality of what the situation is. Because I bet most of the men and women in this room will tell you that that bothered them when that law was passed, that they didn't like it, that they have a perception of what that means. But I think most of them don't spend a whole lot of time in that space. That's my hope. It sounds like you have had some other experiences, which I'm sorry to hear, and I hope that that's something that better information, more investment, and one of the things the legislative body has done, and that the governor did sign, is significant investment in what will be the revamping of the way in which law enforcement training and licensure is handled. Bifurcating those boards, and I don't know if you're familiar with it, but the New Mexico Law Enforcement Academy Board has been 9 men and women for 40 years. And now it's robustly populated with subject matter experts from a variety of different fields, community members, a lot more things, and it handles training separate from certification. And so one of the educational pieces related to training, and Ms. Chavez, I think would be an excellent person to further this discussion with, is what does that look like in the legal block of the curriculum of a law enforcement academy? Pushed down by the state, administered by agencies here in San Juan County, for example, that make sure that the perception of our troops matches the reality, because I will tell you, they're the best recruiters for our folks. So if they misunderstand, if the practitioners misunderstand what the real impact is, it will be no surprise that that will have a negative and detrimental impact on our ability to recruit. So I think it's an excellent point. I think that Another really important action item going forward for this community and New Mexico in general, and this constituency of law enforcement and public safety supporters, is when we start to see those legislative initiatives, any legislative initiative that looks like it will have a negative impact related to law enforcement recruitment and retention, what's to be done about that? And your voice as a community member is significantly more impactful than mine in that testimonial, chair. I will tell you that. That is a fact. And so hearing from the community about their displeasure with things that will disincentivize folks and your perception and your experiences have been very valuable. Thank you for that comment, sir. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir. So HB4 was, came out in post-2020. There was a big push nationally to hold bad cops accountable. They wanted to get at their personal assets, was the theory. And so when we get sued as a police department because of the actions of our officers, then the taxpayers were paying for it, and that's expat. But the push was to hold individual officers accountable for their actions. So that's where that started here. And I had the misfortune of testifying numerous times on this bill and watching it go through the legislature. And it started with that. It was just on police officers, and it was going to hold them individually accountable. And I think Colorado actually has done that with, if I'm not mistaken, like a $25,000 limit, something like that. So they actually did that. New Mexico's changed direction about halfway through the session as the discussions were going. They switched it, so now the individual officers are not held accountable. The cities are held accountable. And they already had the Tort Claims Act that did that, but there was caps on that. And so what they did under HB4 was they raised the caps to, I believe it's $2 million per incident, plus the city has to pay all the attorney's fees for the plaintiffs in those cases. So there became then a built-in incentive for cities to settle those cases fast, right, before they rack up a lot of legal bills. They were trying to get at that. They didn't want cities defending themselves and prolonging the case. They wanted us to settle. Some of that, I'll tell you, I'm just cynical. And, you know, I won't be on the governor's staff tomorrow. Some of that is because so many of our legislators are plaintiff attorneys. Just no way around it. They wrote a law that absolutely makes it easier to sue city governments. They started with it was going to be holding bad officers accountable, and then they stopped that, and they just made, okay, we're going to hold the cities. Then, halfway through that, they hit on the other thing. Well, it doesn't need to just be police. We can make it district attorneys, we can make it schools, we can make it school employees, we can broaden it. So really now it's any governmental entity can be sued under HB4, with the exception of judges. Exception being a lawyer, right? Forgive me, Judge. But, you know, they were able to duck. So what started with we're going to hold bad officers accountable became, in the end, we're going to have bigger lawsuits. And we're going to win them more often. And that's the problem for us in law enforcement was the officers didn't really understand that because at the beginning of it, it was all about holding officers accountable. And so the perception was, just like Ben's talking about, the perception was now this is so much worse for the officers when the reality is this is so much worse for the taxpayers. But, you know, the perception still is that it was bad for the police officer, individual officer. For me, more what it is it goes back to my earlier comments, it's continuing to create the environment where we are going to just scrutinize the heck out of our officers. We are always going to look for those bad moments and capitalize on those however we can. And we're never stepping up to provide, hey, here's all the good things that we need to do to protect our cops. So that to me is where we're at. We lost the HB4 battle. It was bloody and we lost it fast. But it didn't turn out to be the same bill at the end that it was at the beginning.
Anybody else want to comment on that?
Jump in real quick, just from a perspective from when I was at the city rear rancher at the time, I was the deputy chief, and was the chief that identified how the bill started out and how it ended. It was that initial introduction of the bill that survived in law enforcement officers' minds for a long period of time, and maybe still does to a degree. I remember having to go to different shifts and speak with all the shifts and making all of the young officers understand that they were not going to be personally be liable for any settlement. That was difficult when we had police officers believing that their entire livelihood would be at risk And so it was a big lift in order to go around and speak with all law enforcement officers to educate them that that was not the case in the final bill, at least. But I do believe that still lives within certain police officers' minds and things today. I would echo that I would think that just as much passion was put into that, I would like to see the same amount of passion put into holding felons accountable and people that are there committing crime within our communities. I think accountability is good for both sides, quite honestly, right? At the end of the day, our law enforcement officers should be accountable. We work very hard as chiefs, as sheriffs, New Mexico State Police, Department of Public Safety, to make sure that our police officers are held accountable. One of the reasons why I recruited Ms. Sonia Chavez there, our U.S. Marshal, now the Municipal Law Enforcement Academy Director, is exactly for that, to make sure that the cases that are being brought before the Municipal Law Enforcement Academy Board, more specifically, that we do have that built in, that we're sending a message that we do want to raise the professionalism of law enforcement. And I believe we're doing that. And one of the first things that we leaned into at the Department of Public Safety through the Municipal Law Enforcement Academy was to offer free training for all of our agencies. I wanted to make sure that our doors were open, and we don't, I mean, it's not free to DPS, but it certainly is free to all the law enforcement officers who want to get trained. We offered free bias and policing training, we offered ethics training. It was IA investigations training, de-escalation, crisis intervention training. All, we started putting the calendar together. Ben was working with me at the time. We started putting the calendar together to make sure that we offered those training opportunities for our police officers so that they were confident as they were out there working in our communities, that they had the tools necessary in order to be successful. But I will say that in general, it is a belief in law enforcement that has been very hard to overcome this overall kind of feeling of having non-support. Has been difficult, and so I would agree with you on that. Again, the bill in its final form wasn't as bad as it was initially introduced. That being said, I think it definitely had a negative impact on law enforcement at the time, and hopefully we're moving past that. Thanks.
But I think it sets the tone and the attitude.
You're right,
For
absolutely.
a line officer to look up and see, this is what they believe. They believe what is being shown on national TV every night, that we are all bad, and they're looking at the, picked out videos of people, where they show the second half of what took place.
Absolutely.
And it just demoralizes them.
You're absolutely right.
None of my sons would ever be a cop. There's no upside to it.
Well, I will tell you, and so I agree, and I think most of the
There
professionals.
used to be when you started, and when he started, and these other guys started, even the sheriff started. He's probably a younger guy, but
I was just looking at when Chief Hebe was talking about when he started, and I was looking at the color of his hair, and I was wondering what the correlation between those two
But
things
you know,
was.
when a gentleman like these guys walk down the street, they have a uniform on, people look up to him. That's a
Absolutely.
policeman. He's in law enforcement.
You know, I think you're right, Mike. I think you're right, and I
And
hear
now
you.
they get the finger from people in cars. and
Li-
yell.
Literally, yes, sir.
It's terrible.
That's right. You know what?
I think we need to, as a state, we need to do what we can do to make that go away.
You are
Re-educate.
You are speaking my language. I think the antidote, and it's not just as simple as a thing, and I know some of my colleagues have something to say, and I want them to do that. The antidote is the community support. And this community has that, and you have that, and I'm grateful for that. The only way to change the tide of perception is through education and consistency, in my opinion. And that's what we did at the academy. We're going to bring in all this. We trained hundreds. Those classes that the Secretary just mentioned filled up like that. Every corner of the state, hundreds of them. We spent a lot of your money to train our police officers to make sure that they understood where we stood, because it's our investment that we need to keep the good men and women who are willing to do this work. That's critical. Job number one. We need to recruit more folks to come, which is where we're going to need a significant amount of help from not only this community, but all communities. And this community can be an example, because the groundswell associated with misinformation, like I believe has been experienced related to this, but it starts from a sentiment. So when this community, after this engagement and this discussion, starts to see things in the future that it doesn't like the smell test, it doesn't like how that appears from the distance, from maybe perception points that weren't contemplated or were disregarded, that's where this community and Mexicans can stand up and say, no, we're invested in our police officers. And what's great about that is rational and hardworking folks like the represented here can say, it's not mutually exclusive. We are absolutely willing to hold accountable practitioners who shouldn't be in this business in the most severe way. That rings true. Every person up here tell you that the biggest enemy of a bad cop is a good cop, and which is the other 99%. What's really nice to hear is that's also the sentiment of the community. And so I think you're 100% right. I think that this community and its attitude reflects, and then that can be doubled down and leveraged in the rest of Mexico. And particularly, one of the places that needs to be done is we belong to a representative democracy. You elect folks to go speak your mind at that roundhouse, and I will tell you, it's my firm belief that a lot of them did not speak your mind in June relative to crime and public safety, and maybe not on this topic as well, sir. And so I think you're right, Mike.
Our representatives did, they were overwhelmed by arrests.
I think that's right too. Yes, sir.
I just want to say just one more thing real quick. I surely don't want to dominate the conversation on this particular piece and topic. It has been refreshing to work around that roundhouse and have many discussions with legislators that do very much support the police. Aside from, again, HB 4 and that discussion, we're up and down the halls having many discussions about things that we need, and particularly large parts of my job is to advocate for the Mexico State Police in addition to law enforcement in the state as a whole. And we do have a tremendous amount of support. And so I don't want to make it seem like every legislator does not support law enforcement, because it's certainly not the case. Okay? And so I get that there are people that might, the comment that was made on what made it, nonetheless, that is very disheartening to hear. I would say it's not the majority. The next part that I say in general is that we talk about, where we start kind of turning this around, and we talk about laws or legislation, but in large part, I think the discussion should take place within the family as well. There are I'm going to just put it as plain as I can, like, we need your sons and daughters, right? We need your sons and daughters that want to join this profession. And so the conversation needs to start taking place in the home as well about what policing is and what it really means. And we can do our part as well, but and we are, I'm trying to be present in the schools and all of those things, but at the end of the day, those who would want to join law enforcement are going to want to hear from their family members and what they believe in and whatnot. And so I was very pleased with the support that we do get from our communities. I would say that the majority of communities that we serve across New Mexico do support law enforcement. Unfortunately, sometimes they're a lot more silent than we would hope. But I know that it to be true. When you walk into a restaurant or a business, and not so much anymore, just a guy in a suit, but when you're in a uniform, it stands out and people recognize, and they're always very expressive about their support for law enforcement. But I would like to ask, just in general, if you have, a son or daughter that has great character and they're on the bubble or trying to decide what to do, as they go into adulthood, have those conversations with them. And I know it's a hard discussion to have because it's a risky profession. And as you mentioned, it's not only is there risk associated with it, there's liability associated with it. It's not as easy as it used to be, but we do need support in general. I'll say one last piece. Walking, when I used to, my son in elementary school, I would go have lunch with him. I'd go in the lunchroom, I was the most popular guy to walk in the lunchroom because I was in uniform in elementary school. In middle school, it became a little less so. And in high school, kids, they're going to look at you anymore, right? Because it's like, you can't talk to the cops. And so, again, I think, fundamentally, we got to change that perception in the household of what a police officer means to these young people so that when they do graduate from high school, they have a willingness to want to join. Thank you, sir.
Who's next?
Got one over here. She's coming to the microphone too, sir.
My name is Stan. I'm a father of a student at FHS and a cancer survivor. And I was just wondering if anything has been done concerning the systemic discrimination toward Native Americans at the school and in the community. I've been here for about, I'd say, 40 years, and growing up, I've always noticed there's just it's black and white. If someone gets, one guy gets arrested for something, he has to do a certain amount of time, then, another guy gets arrested, then they don't do any time. There's a lot of, if you go to the Salem County Detention Center and talk to people, they'll tell you, there's guys in there for similar crimes with different types of punishments, different, sentencing and all that. But I'm just curious if anything has been done since the incident at FHS last year concerning discrimination. I noticed my son, when I take him to school, parents aren't allowed to go inside anymore. There's, more security, which is good. There's a guy with a gun at the gate, which I don't know if that's good or bad, but, me personally, I don't feel comfortable with it. So that's just my take, is I'm just curious, and I'm worried that, that we're getting further and further into like a, institutionalized way of teaching, system here that it's more authoritarian than it is inclusive, and I'm just curious, if any steps have been taken by law enforcement or anyone to curb that and stop the systemic discrimination that's been going on.
Thank you for your comment, your question, Stan. I'm going to try and reflect some of that back to you just to make sure, because there's multiple layers to that. And I will be happy to try and discuss some of it, but I think some of my colleagues will probably be better suited for some other parts. On the issues related to the local governance, I'm going to let my colleagues answer, because I couldn't tell you what's happening at Farmington High School right now, because I'm not a member of this community. I don't live here. I don't have a student there. I can tell you what's happening at my kid's school, and so I definitely can relate to the importance of that thing. And so that we can kind of take them one piece at a time, and I'll let my colleagues talk a little bit about what's happening at the high schools relative to security, armament, hardening of targets, which I think they will have some opinions on. But the core of your question seemed to circulate around discrimination of Native American people at the school. Is that correct? Can you tell me a little more about what you're talking about so that I can understand?
Well, last year during the graduation ceremony, a young lady had her hat ripped off, and it was thrown in the trash and damaged. It was a cultural item, and it was significant, went viral, and it was shown that, and I don't know if the person who perpetrated the act was, nobody knows what happened to her, or if any action was taken towards the faculty that allowed that to happen, or, how did that occur? Who allowed that to happen where, someone, was not allowed to practice their cultural identity, during the ceremony?
Sure, okay. So then your question is whether or not law enforcement has done anything relative to that, the existence of, your perception of discrimination existing within a graduation ceremony, or is there? Okay, yeah. So I can speak to the experiences that I have. I don't know anything specifically about that, and maybe some of our local law enforcement folks and some of our leaders will have something to weigh in relative to that. So we go to great lengths in law enforcement to make sure that not only our ethics, constitutionality, all of the kind of foundational things related to American society and New Mexican society exist within our law enforcement training. Those things are ingrained in a foundational way at the Law Enforcement Academy. Those things are then retouched every 2 years with our what's called biennium training related to maintenance of effort or annual training. Those things are a matter of law. And so the legislature picks items that it deems important for law enforcement to focus its attention on annually or semi-annually to make sure that their law enforcement officers are appropriately trained. Because as we know, many of the folks up here on the stage have been doing this for several decades. So the society changes, other laws change, other cultural things change. Is the law relative to the profession change? And I think that's a really relevant and important question. One of the things that is being undertaken as we speak is what's called a job task analysis. And one of the things I would encourage is integration of these very specific things, because this is a very specific topic you're talking about related to the thing we isolated, is New Mexico's culture looks different than Hawaii's culture, right? Colorado's culture looks different than Hawaii's culture. In New Mexico, this job task analysis has hired a professional and nationally recognized consultation company to help us understand what are the jobs, core functions, and essential duties of our law enforcement professionals. Where cultural sensitivity related to topics that you discussed fit into that are material, are important, and should be raised on the front end as this governance attacks what is the key role of law enforcement in this place. And so to the specific item, I'm not sure, but to the global kind of 30,000-foot view, I think law enforcement has made extraordinary strides in the almost 3 decades that I've been looking at this from the front seat in figuring out how to be inclusive, not exclusive, how to be sensitive, not insensitive, and how to be fair and impartial under the constructs of the law. That all being said, one of the things that is omnipresent is these are human beings, both on the investigative side when we're talking about a law enforcement officer, and both on the action side relative to the thing they might be investigating. And so those things change. Human beings occupy the roundhouse, human beings occupy the police cars, human beings occupy the school systems. And so I think that a further discussion related to how that cultural sensitivity of any variety should intersect with how police officers are trained to handle that is not only a discussion that needs to continue to develop, but that is worth the investment in, because this is obviously problematic, and it can have a negative impact on how the community feels relative to some of its systems, whether they're school or governmental in law enforcement, and that's important. So thank you very much for raising that. And I'll defer to my colleagues if they have any comments related to the hardening of school targets particularly.
And so you're right on the protest this year. That was a significant event for Farmington High and really for the school district. I can't really speak to the school district in that one. The PD quickly established and maintained a relationship with the parent that was trying to organize that, and it's actually one of the things I like about policing and I like about our country is that you can have a significant issue with the government, and we're going to go out of our way to make you safe as you protest. And I thought you saw that really pretty well established that day. And so I was proud of our department, but I was proud of our community at that moment that you could have that kind of a discussion. The other issue that you're bringing up is a good one. And I will tell you, I don't know the exact answer to how hardened do we make our school. So we had Aztec, it's not a far away place. This is right here in San Juan County, where there was a school shooter. Last May, he was actually coming up on his graduation day, and that easily could have gone to the graduation ceremony. On the other hand, he also wasn't too far from an elementary school, and just chose not to, for whatever reason, to go there. So it is a balancing act. Farmington PD had our own bad incident with an SRO in the school in 2019, and it was an ugly incident that we had to deal with. It caused me because it was also kind of coinciding with the discussion nationwide about too many police in the schools is now criminalizing behavior that previously wouldn't have been a criminal event. And so that there was more national discussion about how good is it to have police officers in the schools, at least in the numbers that we did. Farmington had always had a pretty robust SRO program, really since the late 90s. So I had pulled back some of our SROs out of the schools a little bit. And then 2020 hits and our numbers started climbing, and I really couldn't go back. We were kind of out. As the community moved away from some of those events, there is now increased interest in having school resource officers back in the school. I'm struggling to be able to fulfill that. What we did really work out, and it was with the city manager Mays and with the school superintendent, when police officers retire under para, and this is something I have talked about and maybe we'll talk about later on tonight, but you can't hire them back in government. But you can within the schools because it's a different retirement system. So the school district has moved now to, they've got one that they hired last year, and I think they've got another one now, where they are hiring retired police officers. We are giving them special commissions, and we are helping train them, and we are providing supervision for them. So in many ways, they are just like our officers, but they actually work for the school system. And you're right to be concerned about the over-hardening of that and the institutionalization. I think what I'm trying to balance is how do we make our schools safe so we don't have the May 15th, we don't have the Aztec school shooting, without bringing that to us. So I think that's not just a discussion with the school, but it's also a discussion with the community. What's our tolerance, and what are we really looking for? What I heard more in the early 2022 time frame was they wanted more school resource officers back in there. I think the combination of this retire-rehire plan will give the school district more control of that. How much do they want? What are the parents saying to the schools about how much security they want to see in there? And we, I think, stand willing to work with them on whatever that number really is at the end. So those are legitimate concerns and I think those answers kind of flow. Sometimes we're more scared and we want more officers in there, and sometimes we don't. So it is a good question.
Stan, I'll just comment briefly. It would be great if we had representation from the schools here to address your question. You know, Farmington High School was at their graduation ceremony, and obviously the city doesn't control that organization, but I would definitely present your question to Superintendent Cody Beal. I know he released 2 letters in regards to the situation. It was an unfortunate situation, and one that probably didn't need to happen. So from that angle, I would certainly encourage you to reach out, because I think it's important for you as a father of a student who's there to understand exactly what has been done and what can be done.
Excellent, thank you, Stan. Just for the group's edification, some of the work done by the New Mexico legislature and signed by our governor, return to work for certain sensitive and public safety specific personnel was signed into law and is effective as we speak here today. It's for compartmentalized periods of time, 36 months, but talking about some of the high profile places where we're experiencing some of the largest gaps in employment, correctional officers, both juvenile and adult, security officers related to the courthouse, dispatchers, firefighters, police officers, telecommunicators, sheriff deputies, and state police officers. And so efforts are being made in everything. Again, one of the expectations on the province is that it can't be a thing, it's all the things. Raise the pay, figure out what retention looks like, change the culture, correct misperceptions, increase professionalism, which is a component to what you're talking about, Stan, and I think very important, and then also incentivize good folks that have good track records to return to us so that they can continue to serve, that they're willing. So thank you very much for raising that, Stan. Who'd like to go next? Yes, sir. Let's do this gentleman in the green, then we'll come to you, man, next.
Hi. Okay, my name is Bill Solison. I've been in the construction business most of my life. I was born and raised in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I was taught as a child by my father and my mom to respect the law, to respect our country, to respect our military, and to do what was right. And I've lived that life for 75 years. I think one of the things that's missing here today, in my personal opinion, is some of the focus needs to be put on starting with the family. Getting back to the basics is very, very important. And being able to teach these kids through the family and through the families, and helping the families to understand the importance of law and order in our community. Yes, we do have corruption across this country that's unbelievable. And it's extremely hard for people like you to go out there every day and put yourself in the face of danger because you don't know the crazy that's going to be there. But the best way, I think, to get more police officers there is to go back what I remember as a child. When you ask kids what they wanted to be, they wanted to be firemen, they wanted to be police, they wanted to be military. We need to start with the basics of the family. I'm not sitting here going to talk about what the legislature's doing, and, frankly, I think our legislature's way too liberal. That's just a personal opinion, okay? I think they do a lot of good things, but the bottom line is let's start putting this money that you're putting into different programs into the families. Teach them that being in cartels and gangs and so forth is not appropriate. That the best thing to do is to have a healthy, happy environment to live in. Not to be a member of a gang that if you step out of line, you're going to get your butt kicked. That's not okay. We need to, I have put a lot of time and effort in my life into this community regarding helping children. I was a coach in Aztec High School for soccer. I support the Boys and Girls Club across the county big time. Little silly things like the company that my son runs now puts on a golf tournament. for the Boys and Girls Club every year. This year, we turned over $80,000 from Boys and Girls Club. What did that $80,000 do? It helps to keep close to 400 kids off the street and teach them that there's a better way of life than going out and stealing a candy bar out of a 7-Eleven store. And I think once that's established, the recruitment for police officers is going to change. That the police officers are going to want to be a part of it. You know, I taught my kids, you honor your police. My dad even told me when I was a kid, he says, if you get stopped by a police officer, you guys decide to run, you deserve to, you know, he has the right to shoot you. Maybe that's way out of line. At the same token, we have to have respect for our police, our military, and our country, and get this country back into being patriots instead of putting up with cartels and drugs and so forth. You know, what we've got going on in the state in so many different directions is totally needs to be looked at from more perspective relative to what's important for our future. It's not you, Ben. It's not you, Shane. It's about the children who are coming up and what we need to do to support them. That's the most important thing we need to do. And I have amazing children. You know, my oldest son spent 22 years in the Marine Corps honorably. My second son is running a business. My third son is running a big business in Denver. But it's all done with honest integrity. There's no cheating. There's no stealing. You know, frankly, if I caught him cheating or stealing, I'd get the butt kicked. Because that's the way it should be. It's about honor and integrity. And we need to instill that, starting with the family. Now, I'm not asking any questions. I've made statements. This is my beliefs, and I believe very strongly that the root of our problem today needs to go back to the very basics of starting with the family. We got some amazing families here in Farmington, New Mexico, and that's one of the reasons we have such a great community. You know, we had an incident just the other day. Shane, you need to hear this. We had a whole pool in our backyard, so we live in the county, okay? We had a 5-year-old grandson who's deaf, got in our pool. In 5 minutes, he drowned, okay? Shane Ferrari's men showed up there along with, you know, our paramedics and so forth. Within 15 minutes of the incident, my wife survived that child, got it breathing, and the boy's going to be just fine. But this is the kind of community respect that we need to have for our police. We cannot appreciate what your policemen did, Shane, that day. They were amazing. And that's the respect all of you deserve, because you put yourself on the line every day for us. We need to put ourselves on the line for you. Now, that's my case. Sorry, I get a little bit compassionate.
Bill, the case is closed and you won. Well said. Thank you very much for your support, sir, and your comments. And thank you for your service to your community. I agree. We were having a conversation at youth football the other night in Albuquerque, and one of the children was having trouble affording the cost for the pads or whatever the thing needed. And the parents quickly arrived, a small group of parents quickly arrived at the notion of, are we going to pay for pads or are we going to pay for a detention center bed? Which would you like to pay for? And I agree, investing on the front end of that is critical, and it creates a new pool of folks who otherwise wouldn't have been available to us under the status quo. Thank you very much for your insight.
Sorry, just the way I am.
Well said. Ma'am, down here, I think we have.
Hi, my name is Banter Randall Shorty, and I am the mother of Zachariah Juwan Shorty, who was murdered here. I am also an advocate on Zach's behalf, as well as other families now of the missing and murdered Indigenous relatives. I heard you all talk about community support, about hold on, give me a minute, sorry. About accountability and, you know, just mainly community. But I feel, you know, I've been a resident here in San Juan County for about 25 years now, and I see, you know, it's black and white here. It honestly is. I'm Native American. And, you know, what about equality here? My son, as I stated before, he was, you know, he wasn't on the right path. I was dealing with drug addiction, alcoholism, mental health, suicide in my home, and I was trying to get resources and counseling, and I got them. I you know, as you know, started out when he was a juvenile. He didn't make the right choices, so the night that he went missing from the journey in, and he was with friends, and he was in a place that he shouldn't have been. He was found 4 days later on, you know, just right outside of Kirtland on the Navajo reservation, and he was shot to death. You know, I talk about equality because I don't see that here in our community. About the same time, about the same year, Sasha Krause went missing. She was found murdered. Her killer was immediately found. July 21st, 2024. It's been 4 years, and my son's case remains unsolved. As I stated before, I'm an advocate for other families as well of the missing and murdered. Kyle Jackson, he was found murdered here locally as well. His case remains unsolved. Kendrick Begay, the double homicide on Highway 64, his murder remains unsolved. Bridget Johnson, she was found in her apartment by her mother, stabbed to death. Unsolved. What are we doing in our community? Tell me, what are we doing? What are you doing in our community? My son's case is under the FBI. I know that's a whole different jurisdiction. But what about the other families that I had mentioned? These families are still waiting for answers. Kendrick, it's been a year now. I believe Bridget is a year now. We have people out there living their lives, and every day my life is hell because I want answers and I haven't received anything.
Ms. Shorey, thank you for your courage to stand up and share that information with us. I'm certain that I do not understand how difficult that is, but I am extraordinarily sorry for not only the loss of your son, but the families that you mentioned and advocate for, which I respect and appreciate. The victims of violent crime in New Mexico, victims of violent crime in our tribal nations, their stories have been told to us also in these communities, and you do that here today, and I'm grateful for your willingness to do that and share that, because it is an incredibly important part of the work that law enforcement does, is bring closure to folks who are suffering. And when we haven't achieved that yet, in the cases that are mentioned, it is important for folks to not only be able to share that information so that the community can understand what's going on with your specific information, and then also so that the law enforcement professionals, the prosecutorial professionals, have the opportunity to be able to understand what the circumstances are, whether or not anything's changed, whether there's some information. So I really am grateful for you having the courage to bring that up and share that with us today. Defer to my colleagues that have any information about the specific instances. I know the DA kind of counseled us at the beginning about being cognizant of not spending too much detail on cases that are currently being investigated, and I think we learned a little bit about that yesterday, how important it is to hold tight as we're trying to make criminal arrests in important in cases. But I will tell you that your courage to stand up in front of us and talk about that is well noted and respected by me, so thank you for doing that. Anybody on the panel want to take a shot at that?
Before I turn it over to anyone else on the panel, I want to say something. First, same goes, my sincere condolences. I can't imagine what it's like to lose a child and to not have answers to that situation. I can't imagine how heartbreaking it is, and I imagine it probably consumes every day in your mind, and so I didn't want to gloss over that. There's a lot of cases that you mentioned specifically, and some of them it sounds like they're on the reservation. I know the FBI typically takes the lead on those investigations. I guess the only thing I didn't want to not say anything because it's someone else's jurisdiction at the end of the day, so it was just a statement and an offer about support to any agency within New Mexico. We work very closely with the FBI and all of our federal partners and the sheriff's departments and municipalities. The only thing I can say in general terms is that we will always be there to offer our help and assistance from the Department of Public Safety, New Mexico State Police, to any of our partners, between federal and included. And so, if there's any way we can help in that, we certainly will. We also have 3 of our labs across the state of New Mexico, which I know that our federal partners access as well. We have a lab in Santa Fe, one in Hobbsville, and Las Cruces. And so any way that we can help bridge a gap for a service that's not either being expedited, and we'll be glad to do that. And so I want to give an opportunity to pass over to some of our partners, but I didn't want to just gloss over your concern without at least commenting on it now. Thank you.
Hey, Joey, my condolences also on loss of your son. We're equally as frustrated. It's difficult in law enforcement when we have investigations that run cold. When we exhaust every avenue that we have. We don't have witnesses. We have limited evidence. We don't have witnesses. We are equally as frustrated. I drive past US 64 every day, and there's not a day that goes by that I don't think of that. I look up on that hill and I just hope for a sign, a glimmer in the dirt, whatever it will be, hoping that one day somebody will step forward with some information from us, and we never lose sight of that. It's our role as law enforcement to bring families closure and justice, and bring those who caused this harm to justice and hold them accountable. That's our job. That's what we do, regardless of race, regardless of religion, or anything. That's our job. That's what we're supposed to do. And we never lose sight of that. And it's difficult, and it's very frustrating on us also. We want to bring that closure and that justice to you. It's very difficult. Being a member of the Missing Indigenous Persons, we are heavily involved in that. As a matter of fact, I have Captain Burns here with me today. We just had a meeting today with the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Peoples group. And if Captain Burns, if you want to talk about a little bit about what we're doing and our partnership with them, with that, we can go ahead and give that and give the mic to him. We'll talk about some of our collaboration and how we're working together and helping to provide resources, not only to folks in our community that are abroad. Go ahead, sir.
So again, I'm very sorry for your loss. Our participation at the state level, we are currently awaiting our approval for our position with the Missing, Murdered, and Indigenous Persons Task Force. It's an application process, and so we are patiently awaiting approval for that. We feel confident that based on our previous work in this area that we will be accepted. And so combined with the Missing, Murdered, and Indigenous Persons, we are also very actively involved in human trafficking, which can be partially overlapping with those two events. And so again, from a public safety standpoint, we are participating very heavily in the Missing, Murdered, and Indigenous persons, and then also the human trafficking task force at the state level, and with our non-governmental organizations. And so we're spreading out as far as we can, using all of our resources and our partnerships to try to solve these crimes.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Who will go next? Do you have any other questions or any other comments that you'd like to make? Yes, sir. Right down here at the front.
Good evening. I'm Lieutenant Christopher Rockwell. I'm the Salvation Army Commander and Spiritual Leader here in Northwest New Mexico. And one thing, and this is, I just want to plant this seed here, and I think you guys are probably already aware of it. What Farmington really needs, because I see the mental health issues every day where I'm at. And I come from a background of drug and alcohol addiction. And one of the things I think as a community, and I don't know how to get there yet, and or how it's going, what it's going to look like or whatever, but long-term care would be really, really good here. I believe God sent me to this amazing community for a reason. I love it here. I love the people here. And they've shown me the love too. Is that something for people where they can get their needs addressed, but done in a way that's very deep and comprehensive. Like we have in the Salvation Army an adult rehabilitation program. We got it in Albuquerque. I'm going to hopefully try, with Jesus' help, to get that here in Farmington, but it's long-term care can make a difference. And while not everybody is going to probably want that care, because you have people, I don't need that. You have those people. But there's a lot of people, from what I see and I talk to, they would like to have a place where we could address their needs, because one of the big needs that needs to be addressed is spiritual needs. And that doesn't get addressed. And it can all fall into place with that. And if I am blessed to be here with a program like that get started, or to partner with somebody or whatever, I'm more than willing to do so. But that's, I think, because Farmington is kind of isolated. And I think that makes the need even stronger here, because somebody who's going through what I went through, or PTSD situations or mental health, if they're able to be here, they can connect with their family and their friends, and of course their church, whatever that might be, or whatever their faith might be, and to establish something that's going to provide a pathway of hope for them here in this county. And they're not having to be shipped off to Albuquerque or Denver or Phoenix. They're right here. So it's something important. Like I said, I'm not expecting you guys to have, oh, Lieutenant, I know what we're going to do. I'm not expecting that. But I just want to plant the seeds. And I know you guys are aware of it, are aware of these different situations and scenarios. And I appreciate the honor of being here tonight with all of you, and I appreciate everything that you all do. I back you 100%. I love all of you. And it's just something that I want to make myself available, and just so I share with you what the Lord's putting on my heart to discuss tonight. So thank you all for being here, and thank you for all that you do. You're all amazing. And yeah, just wanted to let loose with that. So.
Thank you, Mr. Rockwell. That's excellent. And a couple of things I want to share with the community that you've kind of stimulated to the surface here, which are important, is obviously we're talking about long-term care, which cuts to kind of one of the earlier discussion points, which has to do with availability, proximity. So you're hitting those are all very good, and I think it's really important. There's two pieces of legislation, and I'm going to go back to this because it's important, because some of these things, and you alluded to it, you made a really important point. Some people aren't going to want some of the care that they absolutely need. And I don't say that from a position of hubris, I say that from a position of experience and practical matter, is that it is difficult to get to some of those core issues that are driving folks, particularly as they relate to substance abuse disorder, mental health disorder, in 24 hours at a hospital, or in a couple days in a detoxification center, particularly to the point you raised, when it's away from the other support structures that maybe are the things that that person could be living for and be aiming at. And so two of the bills that were introduced to be heard and debated at the special session had to do with criminal competency, which we've talked a little bit about. But the other one has to do with the revamping of what is called civil commitment. And I'm speaking now to community members, to mothers and fathers, to parents, to relatives of folks who have a person within their family who is otherwise an adult, who is struggling with one of these things and can't get help. I'm going to share with you what I learned in Carlsbad last week. This is what I learned from a citizen in Carlsbad last week. Business owner said, I took my family member to 10 different rehabs. I did self-pay, I did Medicaid pay, I did all of the things, and that person walked away from all of them. And this is an opioid addiction. And she was going to die, and she was going to get worse, is what the constituent was saying. She said, I took them to Chihuahua, Mexico, where we are originally from. She's a naturalized citizen now who was born and raised in Chihuahua, Mexico, where they committed her involuntarily for a period of 45 days. She said when she returned to me, she is cured. She's now in treatment here in New Mexico that's outpatient. She has a social structure that's redeveloping. She has a connection with her family members. All of the things you want to hear about recovery are occurring in this person's life because that insurmountable task of forcing yourself over that hill was undertaken. And I shared that with this community because I thought it was extraordinarily meaningful that I had a citizen who we share a state with say, I had to take my relative to Mexico to get the kind of care I needed to cure them of this substance abuse disorder. And I say that because we wanted this bill debated. I won't presume to have all the answers, but I know that New Mexico can have all the answers, but we have to have the debate first, is what does that look like? And so, as an action item, Rockwell, that I think would be really, really useful and be really meaningful from my perspective, given your heart in this matter, is we've got to get the people to be willing to call Farmington home to do that work, and we have to have support towards a methodology that is different than what we are working with now, where folks are literally just going to make their own decisions under the current condition that they are experiencing, which I think everybody in this room has at least some peripheral or passing experience with, does not work. And so I really appreciate not only your comments, your willingness, your work, but you're on the ground. You are intersecting with these folks, much like many of our public service professionals in here, and the medical professionals, and they're seeing and can tell you what does not work. And what does not work is the current status quo. And so we asked for some debate on this topic and some changes to these laws related to competency and civil commitment so that folks can get the treatment and the help that they so desperately need. So I think we're on the same page, and I'm really grateful for your offer and your efforts. Thank you very much, sir. That is the experience I'm having, and I'm grateful for that. Thank you. Please.
Lieutenant, thank you for your comments and for your willingness to speak. I'm going to have Robin from our staff follow up with you and get your contact information. I think it may be more my sister agency, the Healthcare Authority, and its Behavioral Health Services Division that will end up following up with you. But we're very interested in finding partners who want to do community-based work and try to figure out different ways that we can support them. And faith-based communities are very much a successful part of how we do this kind of work because you hit the nail on the head. You can talk about treatment, but if you talk about treatment in isolation, its chances of being successful drop way off. And so being able to wrap that in all the other things that go with a long-term relationship and support in the community, I think are really important. So we'll follow up and see if we can start a conversation.
Thank you, Secretary. Okay. Yes, sir. Right up front, Councilman. Here she comes. She's coming from your right, sir.
I'm just going to say a comment. I don't have a question. I come as a father, as a husband. I wear many hats. A lot of people might know me, they might not know me. I'm a current boxing coach here in Farmington. I've been a boxing coach for 16 years. I go to the jail and the prisons across New Mexico, been going for 10 years. And I'm currently clean from drugs and alcohol over 10 years. I used to be an alcoholic. I used to get in a lot of trouble. but now I'm married 27 years, father of 4 daughters, and I have 3 graduates from Farmington High School. I got currently another high school student. I just wanted to share a comment to my brother over here. I'm a Native American, and the school has a policy, and it was written in the policy, and I didn't see the guidelines followed. But my daughters know they can't decorate their attire, but it was decorated. So I believe that, personally speaking, I believe the parents are the ones who didn't read the paperwork. That's me. And in my opinion, that they put our police officers at risk when they did the march. That was very dangerous as far as a parent's point of view on my part. On the other part, I agree with the gentleman in the green shirt. I believe it's the parents that are the ones that need to teach their children a lot more. I have 4 daughters. I watch where they're at all times. I'm the one who pays for the phone bill, and I check what they're looking at online. We need parents that are more strict. We need parents that are watching their children and watching their friends. My grandma, my mother used to tell me who your friends are, and I'll tell you who you are. And that was brought up in my home. My dad, he took his belt off and whooped me every time I got an F on my report card. And we need that. He used to tell me, if you come home with a one-legged A, you're gonna get a whoop. And that's the same thing I say to my boxers in my boxing gym. And I tell them, I said, no drugs, no drinking, no cussing, no smoking. And I have strict rules for them, and I tell them that, and I joke with them. If you have an F on your report card, first of all, you can't box. Second of all, I'm gonna whoop you. And I'm joking when I say that, but I let the parents know that I'm pretty stern where I stand. You know, and I'm just glad to be a part of the city. I'm glad to be a part of a great police force. I want to thank you guys, each and every one of you, for standing in the gap for us. And I honor you guys. I'm proud to be a city councilor here in Farmington. And I got to leave early because I got to go to the jails. I work with the inmates, so that's where I'm headed currently. So I'm going to excuse myself, and I just want to say thank you. Thank you. I love and I pray for each and every one of you guys.
Thank you, Councilman. That's very kind, and thank you for your work. Appreciate you being here. Do we have any other questions or comments that folks would like to make? Right here. Yes, ma'am.
My name's Maria Lopez. I'm a property manager here in Farmington. I manage a couple of mobile home parks. They have a bad rap. I currently manage one on Fairgrounds and another on the Vine. I have a house across the street from my Fairgrounds park that is known for all the druggies go there. You see them all. Well, that brings bad rap to Lamplighter. And again, Willow Winds, there's a house on the side of the hill that is known, and there's drug traffic, and you name it. I struggle with the catch and release. Is that ever going to go away here in New Mexico? It needs to go away. Because I see repeat offenders. I know them by face, by name, because they're in my park, raising hell. And I learned, I look it up, I search, they have a warrant. I call Farmington PD. They're looking for it, and they get thrown in, and then they're released within 24 hours. Is it going to go away?
So that's an excellent discussion. We should actually continue on for about another hour just talking on this subject.
Yeah. And you guys are spinning your wheels.
Yeah. But first, we have Sergeant Bobbity from the Sheriff's Office is in charge of our region unit. He's here. We'll have him get with you and let's identify those places. Very good. And we'll also have one of our district coordinators get with you and let's figure out where those places are and let's get them away from your residence.
There's cars there that aren't registered. People are living in them.
Yeah, there's stuff we can do, and so we'll get with you tonight and we'll see what else we can do to help you there.
I feel like I'm a one-man show. A lot. I really do.
And I'm sorry you feel that way. Honestly, you are not. We are with you. We will help you. But I'm sorry you feel that way. As far as the pretrial release, that is definitely a subject of conversation. I understand how we got here, and it's not just New Mexico. This is a nationwide trend. We're trying to get away from just arresting people and the mass incarceration that I referred to earlier. And then we're also trying to get away from, if you're poor, you stay in jail when you get arrested because you can't afford bail, right? And so we passed the constitutional amendment as a state, but then the rules changed. And that came from the Supreme Court. And that's one of the problems with the governor's office. That's one of the problems for our legislatures, is the Supreme Court set the rules, and they changed really what we thought we were voting on. We thought that we would keep the most violent people in jail, and that they would release some of the lower level offenders, and we would be a little more just than just keeping the poor people in jail. And so that's where it started, and then it morphed, and now we're just in a mess. Now we're really not keeping almost anybody in jail. I agree. So we had a case in July here in Farmington where somebody was arrested for stabbing, which is pretty serious. He stabbed somebody. They were released, and within a week they stabbed 2 other people, one of them nearly to death. So the cost of the pretrial release program is how many people are badly injured or killed as a result of that, because we're not making good decisions about who we want to hold in jail and who we don't. Now, I was at one of the public town halls that the media in Albuquerque was holding, and one of the legislators basically said it's the judge's fault and it's the police's fault. The police are not doing a good enough job of arresting people, and the judges are making poor decisions on holding them. And honestly, I was very unhappy, because I view that as nothing more than leadership abandonment. You're an elected leader in our community. If you're not happy with the way the judges are holding people, if you don't think that they're doing what you want them to do, well then you actually have some tools as a legislator to change that. And instead, as you saw during the governor's special session, they just closed up shop and left. So I did not like that. To me, one of the top challenges we have in New Mexico is the pretrial release. It is the person that is in jail on a stabbing and then gets out and stabs 2 other people. And the Supreme Court themselves have actually changed the rule a number of times. They've tried to adjust it since really 2018, when you listen to our local judges talk about this, and I just was here a couple of weeks ago. The Supreme Court has made a series of rulings to try and tighten up, to try and encourage judges to hold people. But I know our own judges were trying to hold people when it first passed, and they were being overruled. And dangerous people were being released. So that was the philosophy initially, and now they're trying to walk that back some. It's way too small and way too little, but there is some movement back from it. But I agree with you. I don't think that it's not the governor's office that necessarily can control that, although they can help us.
So how do we change it?
It has to come, honestly, it has to come from the legislators, and some of that's with a push from the governor's office, but it also has to come from the courts. So who we're voting for to be judges matters. And that directly, we elect our Supreme Court justices here. And so we have a very real say in how these rules are being propagated. And that was sold to us a certain way, which I even agreed with, that we would focus on the dangerous people, and it just hasn't been that way in practice. And the only way to really change it is get at the folks that have decision making. That's our legislators, and that's the Supreme Court.
Ms. Lopez, thank you, Chief. Not only is that an excellent answer, you're 100% correct. Ms. Lopez, you are 100% correct. So let me give you a couple things, because I was with some of the folks up here on the panel. So myself, the Secretary, the Chief, Chief Heavy, others, many other leaders here have testified on a alternative. So the governor has run bills every session since that constitutional amendment changed, since she's been in office, that would demand what's called a rebuttable presumption, which basically means that the defendant needs to prove while they're not a danger to society. And that is the standard that exists within our federal system and other places. So it is not unconstitutional, nor is it something that can't be done. We have presented that bill every session, and I have testified on that bill every session with several of the people up here, and we don't get an audience. And I encourage you, the great thing about our New Mexico legislature is now they report everything. To be able to watch what happens to us in testimony when we stand up there and explain things like person is released and then this happens. And you watch the committee be impacted by that so little that they immediately table that bill and it goes away. Last year it was Senate Bill 122, and the governor voiced her displeasure on putting a bill on the call, messaging a bill that she thinks is important for New Mexicans, and having the legislature take no action. That is a really important piece. And I think it was said really well earlier by Secretary Bowie. We're not talking about every legislator. The goal here is not to demonize the position. It's critical and it's a separate but equal branch of government that needs to be done. I also think the chief did a really good job of not demonizing the judicial branch. They have a job to do too. One piece of success that I absolutely think is supportive of the chief's observation that this is starting to trend in the correct direction. We passed last session, and the governor signed Senate Bill 371, which has to do, and again, no one's going to have their socks blown off by this, but the notion is if you are already on conditions of release, so in the example that the chief gave, you've been arrested and you are pending trial on a felony charge, and you reoffend, you don't get out anymore. Now, I will say that it's baby steps progress, and I agree with your shoulder shrug. However, well, so I will tell you, I'm watching the data in Albuquerque particularly, and let me hit you with this number because it's important to see the impact. In addition to the good work that law enforcement is doing, I monitor, because we are running a program in Albuquerque where we have consolidated reporting of our law enforcement agencies. So I know how many people are in jail, and I knew how many people were in jail in September before that was a law. It was 1,300 people month over month in September of 2023. This morning there are 1,850 people in the jail month over month now. So we're talking about a net increase of over 500 folks continually incarcerated in our jail. Now these are pre-adjudicated folks. Our Department of Corrections and Deputy Secretary Martinez housed 20 to 30 folks in the prison who are post-adjudication serving time to free up space. We're making some progress. That's significant. And the micro example would be down here in San Juan County or in some of other smaller jurisdictions. The same analysis can be undertaken. I don't offer that as some sort of solution because that is not the end-all be-all. But what I do think it does, and I think it's important for the community to understand this, because I've got to see it from the front seat, is we pushed for that as law enforcement, as prosecutors, as the community. They heard us, they voted, they passed it, the governor signed it, it is now law, and it actually has had an impact the correct direction on the jail populations statewide. So, way more work to be done, I agree. Rebuttable presumption against release, pretrial detention is something the governor has put forward every time. But what we saw this year particularly was she put forward that, and she put forward something that was effective but not impossible to pass, which ends up being part of the job here, is figuring out what good laws we can get across the finish line. And so you are absolutely right. The concern you raise is echoed by constituents all over the state. It is heard by your governor. It's heard by your law enforcement, your prosecutorial professionals. And I think that we are creeping in the right direction. I have no doubt, and I will say this tonight to this community, I have no doubt that the governor will continue to push for reasonable pretrial detention to be reinstated in New Mexico at every available opportunity she has. I think the same anecdote exists here, is that it's us speaking to our elected officials, us voting our conscience relative to these topics and the places that have impact. But I wanted to point that out only because it is important to know what progress has been made and how much more there is to do. So thank you for raising the concerns, and I'm grateful that you're able to connect here as a community member with your chief of police, with your leaders in governance, to start to work towards solving problems that you're experiencing right now. So thank you very much for being here and raising those. Okay. Is there anybody else? I know we're getting to time. Do we have a question here? She can bring you a microphone in.
I just wanted to change the subject a little bit. Billy and I both own a houseboat at Navajo Lake, and they've always had plenty of rangers and things to help out. But like case in point, not this last weekend, but the weekend prior to that, we had an 18-year-old drowned, and no one was around except for the campers and Jarrett, who owns the marina, etc. And what we're needing is rangers, and I know that they need to go through, I believe, the police academy to get to it, but we really need word out to get rangers there so that we can have more safety and protection at Navajo Lake.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your comments, and you are exactly right. Obviously, the need exists. There's no question, and the function is correct. So we're talking about New Mexico State Parks, and most rangers, not all of them, but many that do the functions that you're talking about, are certified law enforcement officers, are trained at the New Mexico Law Enforcement Academy by Ms. Chavez and her glorious staff. We have had some really significant increases there, and I think that's a really important thing. I got to see some of the very beginnings of it during my tenure there. So the New Mexico legislature signed, the governor was able to authorize or sign a parity package. So a lot of our state executive branch law enforcement folks were not handled the same way that men and women who serve either in the state police or almost every municipal or county law enforcement agency. It was a function of antiquated rules within our state personnel office. Well, many places, the Attorney General's office, the New Mexico Law Enforcement Academy is working on that. State parks, the insurance folks that investigate insurance fraud, basically all of the niche specialized law enforcement folks that don't fit into one of these other buckets were not treated the same. So, as you heard from my colleagues here tonight, imagine trying to recruit for those jobs that are not even being compensated properly. That has changed. The pay went up in a significant way, and what we saw as a result, the first class that I had, where that pay changed, we had 5 times more folks than we had ever had in one single class in the state parks. Yes, so we're talking now, and again, one of the things that's really important to know, so it's just like what I was just telling her, it's a vector in the correct direction. It is a gigantic state with lots of state parks with lots of needs. The need at Navajo is probably symmetrically felt at Elephant Butte, Conscious, and other places, I have no doubt, sadly. But the good news is that getting that pay parity fix so that people are willing to apply has already had some significant impacts on attendance at the academy, which is a first step. Because if they are not hired and they are not put through training, they're never going to arrive to be the first responders that are needed by our community. So happy to discuss further when we break, and happy to connect you with other folks, not only within that division of the executive branch of government, but also on the training side, so that we can discuss further, because I think that is an important point that you raised. And thank you again for bringing that up.
I'd like to make a comment on that also, with the unfortunate circumstance that happened. It was July 27th when that young man drowned. It was equally frustrating with some of the changes that we're having at the Navajo Park area that we've seen over the last couple of years. Some of it was the way they redistricted some of their priorities over there and what they cover. So the New Mexico State Parks responsibilities is surface water and the campgrounds. And over the last few years, we've seen quite a few improvements in there, which you'll see that along their camping sites and stuff, offering free utility hookups. You see the entrance. The phenomenal job that marine owners done is expanding and making it more family friendly. What that does is attract more visitors. There are 7 New Mexico park rangers supposed to be assigned to that area. Right now, we only have 2. So they are facing the same issues we are in shortages of manpower. And as Mr. Baker talked about, luckily those changes had been made in state law. Because those park rangers that would go there, that were certified law enforcement officers and being far underpaid, they would quickly leave to other law enforcement agencies for higher pay. Just to give you a little bit of foundation on that. What I've got my agency doing right now is getting together a meeting with New Mexico State Parks, State Police we'll be visiting with, along with our Emergency Operations Center and, of course, our office, and develop a plan in these shortcomings and the holiday weekends and other times when we see a higher population out there, what we can do, whether it's New Mexico State Parks being able to direct some resources up here for those times, and really come up with a better plan of how we're going to respond to these type of incidents. It's very important to us. It's very important to Commissioner Fortner. She brought up the topic to the governor's office also. So that is our hope moving forward, and we'll have that meeting, I'm hoping, in the next month or so. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, sir.
I've come here to Farmington, I've lived here for 6 years, and I think that you're trying to encourage people to move here and retire here. It should be a safe place to live, because I think the old industries won't last forever, so we diversify trends, tourism, And quality of life is important for retirees. They want to live in a safe neighborhood where houses are not broken into, and their grandkids can ride their bikes when they visit grandma and grandpa. And, well, I guess I lived kind of a privileged life because my mom was worked with personnel with the Navajo Nation Police Department. And a few bad apples can give a bad impression for the whole department. And some of the things discussed over the dinner table that her and my dad talked about, some of them, you guys really go through some hard times, a lot of stress, and I don't know how your spouses deal with that, but I had a lot of sympathy for the police, for the people in uniform. I am former Army officer. I served 12 years, and so when they would pull my mom over, or they would put me over, my mom would say, "Hey, I'm so-and-so, remember me from personnel?" We do cross commissions, and we talk to some of your colleagues up in Santa Fe. And so I lived kind of a privileged life, but then they retired and I moved here, and I was pulled over like 6 times. It's really odd, my life, been pulled over 6 times by the Farmington Police Department. And so I started posting on social media. My friends were saying, blah, blah. And so that was my life here within 6 years in Farmington. Where am I going with this? So that was my thing with the police department, my life. As my mom is a civilian working with the police for over 25 years, being a vet, and just wanted to share my experience with that as a citizen in Farmington. I was hoping for a little bit more engagement with the community in San Juan County. I thought there would be like 40, 50 people, civilians, citizens here. But I wanted to really find that. I was hoping for that, the engagement. So that's all I wanted to just leave my comment. As a citizen, as a new citizen of Farmington, hoping that the situation can, I don't really like the situation here. Well, I do like the situation here. I was placed here by the Episcopal Church. And so the history with when I was coming into, I read about before I came here. But I would just I've written about the speeding on the streets that I'm really tired of. Like when my parents retired here and there's, I know that's a city ordinance problem, but they were just like some peace and quiet once in a while. It just seems like pandemonium on Saturdays, but we're all doing our best. We're limited resources, and we're doing our best. And I really want to give kudos out to the state police because they're always professional, they're always there. And then the Channel County Police Sheriff's Department's always there because I have a couple of a church in Orfano, even though they take a long time to come out because we're a rural community, but they're going to be there. And the Navajo Nation has less police departments for the whole Navajo Nation, and they're doing our best. So I guess you guys are doing your best. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your service. Do we have any other questions or comments? I think does that sound like thunder to everybody else? That's a significant difference when we walked in here, when you could melt from your car to the door. Are there any other questions or comments from the community? Or anybody who's here like to speak up? All right. Well, I am going to thank this Farmington and San Juan community for their willingness to come. I'm going to give you one advisement. One of my colleagues let me know that I should give folks, not just who are physically here, but also folks that are streaming this online. If you're interested in contacting your legislative body, the website is newmexicolegis.gov. And the reason why that's important is because, if you're not sure who represents you, and one of the solution points coming out of this is making sure that they're representative of your thoughts and beliefs, it's important to know how to contact those folks. So you can locate them on that website, and it will drill down to your address, so you'll know exactly who represents you both in the House and the Senate. I think that's important. And then also knowing for certain that you are able to contact the New Mexico Office of the Governor, the New Mexico Department of Public Safety, the agencies that are represented up here. I want to thank each of these folks for their willingness to participate in this panel discussion, to engage with this community, and to bring their expertise to bear here. Thank you very much, Farmington, for allowing us to host this and for coming and joining us in solutions towards our shared goal of a safer New Mexico. Good evening. Thank you.